Roles are a common subject in most books on effectiveness, and for good reason. But before looking at how to define your roles and improve your roles, I want to give you a new way to think about your roles altogether, which is what most secular books are not able to do. So what are roles actually? I think it's significant to tie them to the Christian doctrine of vocation. Actually, they are, properly understood, a part of the doctrine of vocation. So a role is often defined as an area of responsibility. That is, as your function in a family, such as parent or child, or organization, whether marketing director or chief happiness officer or something like that, or in society. And this is right. But we can say more. Talking about roles puts us right at the heart of the Christian doctrine of vocation. The Bible teaches that our roles are not just areas of responsibility, but callings. Our roles are each callings given to us by God and through which we serve God and others. This applies to all of us and to every area of our lives, which means four things. First, all Christians have a calling, not just pastors and missionaries. Whatever you are doing in life, you are not there by accident. Jesus has placed you there. You see this, for example, in 1 Corinthians 7:17 through 24, which is one of the fundamental chapters, actually, on calling and the doctrine of vocation. And you are able to carry out your role, whatever it is, as long as it's a lawful role, unto him and for his glory. Here's how Martin Luther puts it. He says, a cobbler, a smith, a farmer, each has the work and office of his trade, and yet they are all alike consecrated priests and bishops, and everyone by means of his own work or office must benefit and serve every other, that in this way many kinds of work may be done for the bodily and spiritual welfare of the community, even as all the members of the body serve one another. So calling is not just for a special group of Christians, missionaries, and pastors, or something like that. Calling is for every Christian. Every area of life is actually a calling. Every lawful trade or profession is able to be done as a calling. Second, it means not only that all Christians have a calling, but that every area of our lives is a calling. This is the doctrine of vocation. We have one chief calling, our primary calling, and that is to follow Christ. And then flowing out of that, we have secondary callings or roles, areas of responsibility. And those group into 5 areas, as we're going to see. But those 5 areas are what we are doing with our life. And then within each area, you can get more specific. What is my main thing here? Like in the area of professional calling, what is my career going to be? What is my work going to be? That's a legitimate question. But a lot of times we speak of that area as the only area where we have a calling, where we need to figure out what to do with our life. And in reality, we need to think about that in relation to the rest of life and the rest of our callings, because the professional arena is not the only kind of calling that we have. This means that all of our jobs in every area of our life has a dignity and meaning that give great significance to it. Because of the priesthood of all believers, a core Christian doctrine, we can do all things unto the glory of God, and there is no distinction between first-rate Christians, such as those in ministry, and second-rate Christians. Every Christian is a first-rate Christian, and secular vocations are not only permissible, but valuable. Early in the life of the church, some viewed so-called secular vocations as merely the permissible life, but not the ideal life. The ideal life was that of monks and clergy and things like that. That is a completely false distinction. It is not the case that ministry work is ideal and secular work is merely permissible, but if you really want to make a difference, you have to go into ministry. All types of work can and should be done unto Christ, and what makes them holy is that they are done in response to Him. Fourth, it means that each role is a stewardship for which we are ultimately responsible, not just to other people, but to God Himself. The responsibilities of each of our roles derive not finally from our relationships to other people, but from God Himself. This applies to the privileges of each of our roles as well. They are likewise not merely human inventions, but gifts from God to equip us in our role. This gives not only significance to what we do, but great weight to what we are doing. Now, how should we define our roles? That is our vocations, not vacations, vocations. How do we define them? How do we know what they are? Well, since each area of life is a calling and stewardship from God, it is important for us to make sure that we have clearly identified what our callings are. And fortunately, this is actually relatively simple. To get a clear grasp of what your callings or vocations, roles are, take a few minutes to just reflect and list what comes to mind. For example, your roles might include Christian, husband or wife, father or mother, son, brother or daughter, sister, friend, neighbor, citizen, blogger, marketing executive, or whatever your profession is. Perhaps you could also include small group leader if you lead a small group in your church, or church member, and on and on. You get the idea. This is how you know what your roles are. These are examples of roles. Now, of course, we immediately encounter one problem, which is that actually we each have a lot of roles. And if you were to literally list all of them, it would probably be more than you can easily keep track of. So what do you do? Well, one solution is to combine roles. For example, if you are a wife and mother, instead of viewing them as separate roles, you could view them together, wife/mother. That's the type of thing that Stephen Covey recommends, and he recommends keeping your roles down to about 7 and combining roles to make that possible. You could also see the role of small group leader and church member perhaps underneath the larger role of Christian and so forth. There are some roles which end up just not getting mentioned because they can't fit within the 7. So I take another approach, which I think is worth considering. And it goes back to the Reformation again. The Reformers, especially Luther, grouped all of our various vocations of life into what they called estates. And they saw 4 main estates: the family, the church, society, and what they called the common order of Christian love. Luther included in the family or household the callings of marriage, raising children, and being a child. He also included here the way you make your living, your job. Now, this made sense back then in his day, but I find it helpful to distinguish our job from the estate of the household and see it as really part of another estate, which I call professional. By the common order of Christian love, Luther meant our general overall calling to serve anyone in need. The primary avenues of our service to others come through our specific vocations, but as we see in Luke 3:10 through 14, we are also to go beyond and, in Luther's words, feed the hungry and give drink to the thirsty wherever they are. Forgive enemies. Pray for all men on earth and do good to all people everywhere as we have opportunity. This is what Luther called the vocation of the common order of Christian love. You can think of it like this. We have certain avenues or channels which organize our service to the world. This gives order and structure to our lives. That's our various roles in the home, in society, in the workplace, in the church. But then there's this overarching role called the common order of Christian love, which says, and help anyone in need you come across. Don't say, well, that's not part of one of my roles. I'm going to let you starve. anyone you come across who is in need, you are to help. They are your neighbor. That's the point of the parable of the Good Samaritan. And we should do, as I'm arguing today, since we have technology which makes it possible to meet needs all around the world, I'm saying that this estate of the common order of Christian love means we should take action on a global scale to fight large global problems, because technology gives us access now to this fight. And so we don't simply look to help those in need who are right in front of our driveway or wherever we come across on the road. We also realize now we are neighbors at a global scale, and we are to look for ways we can serve the global poor and those in need. Now, I take a variation in order to organize my roles. I take a variation on Luther's 4 estates, and I group my callings or roles into 5 areas, which I call individual, that's like personal development and all that stuff, family, church, social, and professional. Each of these major groupings then contains my specific callings, which I actually list more as responsibilities than the roles themselves. By having them grouped in these 5 estates or overarching categories, I can then be comprehensive and actually list out really every single role and responsibility I have, and yet it stays simple and organized because it all groups within 5 areas. Up on the screen right now, we are putting an example from my work life when I was director of internet strategies at Desiring God, which shows an example of how the responsibilities can be organized within a specific role. So you can see that my role breaks down into a few sub areas. Individual spreading, that was one of our responsibilities there. Departmental management, executive leadership, and industry relations. And every aspect of my job description fit within one of those 5 areas. Okay, we've seen how to organize your roles. Now, where do you keep your list of roles and their responsibilities? First, it is not a bad idea to add it right into your mission document. I talked about creating a document where your purpose statement is and your values and your life goal. And right underneath that, you could list your roles grouped within the 5 estates. And then everything is together in one document, and you basically have a complete picture of your life from the 20,000 foot level of roles up to the 50,000 foot level of purpose. That is an amazing thing to have. Second, since it is helpful to add notes to each of your roles, you can put in reminders for certain types of things you do and principles. It can also be helpful to outline your roles in a mind mapping tool or an outlining document. Mind Manager is a decent mind mapping tool, or I actually, for my roles, prefer Omni Outliner. It's an outlining tool, and you can organize things and add notes and all of that. Wherever you keep your lists is fine, as long as it is easy to access them and conversely not annoying to find them. It's critical to minimize the annoyance factor in pulling out your list of roles or any other list you have, because if it's annoying, you'll never want to look at it. Last of all, there's a cool way to improve any role called role plans. What you can do is take any role and go into more detail about what it involves. And a small example of it is the chart that we just saw from my role as Director of Internet Strategies at Desiring God, but you can go into more detail in that. And in each of the responsibilities I listed, you can list what's involved. What do I have to do every week in relation to this responsibility? What are some key philosophies and mindsets that govern how I go about it? Now, once you have your roles defined, one of the things you'll do is actually review them in your weekly planning, which we will see. But another thing that happens is you identify types of stuff you have to keep doing that you do maybe every week or every month or so. And you identify things you have to keep in motion. And so it becomes helpful to have a basic structure or ideal week, a framework to your schedule that the functions and activities of your roles fit into. And that's what we're going to look at in the next session.